What if I told you that the shadowy figures lurking in your town hall, your favorite cafe, or even your neighborhood could be part of an ancient secret society that's been accused of everything from satanic rituals to world domination? What if the symbols you pass by every day, the all-seeing eye, the compass, and square, are clues to a hidden power? Dive into a world where truth is stranger than fiction and discover what you were never meant to know. Ready to uncover the chilling reality of the Freemasons? Chapter 1. The Veiled Beginnings. The Freemasons are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. From those shadowy cornerstones on historic buildings marked with strange symbols to the obscure lodges nestled in our towns and cities, the Masons have been part of our world for centuries. But what are they really hiding? To understand the terrifying allure that Freemasonry holds in the public's imagination, we must journey back to its eerie beginnings, to a time when secrets were sacred and those who dared to unveil them disappeared without a trace. It all started with stone, the cold, unyielding blocks used to build castles, cathedrals, and fortresses during the Middle Ages. In those times, a mysterious group of skilled stonemasons traveled from place to place, leaving behind towering structures that seemed almost impossible for human hands to create. These craftsmen belonged to a guild, a sort of medieval club with its own rules, customs, and hierarchy. But as their influence grew, so did their need for protection and secrecy. This was no ordinary labor union. As cathedrals rose higher, so too did the prestige and mystique of these guilds. It wasn't just about building anymore, it was about knowledge. The kind of knowledge only a few could possess, whispered from master to apprentice, guarded with oaths as strong as the stone they carved. Soon, these masons began to meet not just to discuss work, but to perform strange, ritualistic ceremonies, cloaked in secrecy and heavy with symbolism. These gatherings were said to be so secret that only those who knew the exact signs and passwords could enter. And it wasn't long before people began to ask questions. The first murmurs of suspicion started to spread. Why all the secrecy? What was really happening behind those locked doors and curtained windows? The answers, it seemed, would remain out of reach, as those who knew the truth guarded it with a fanatic dedication. This was the birth of what would become the Freemasons, a society so shrouded in mystery that it has spawned countless legends and terrifying tales. But the transition from mere stonemason guilds to the shadowy fraternity we know today didn't happen overnight. As the world changed, so did the society. In the early 17th century, the guilds began to accept men who weren't masons at all. These new members were speculative masons, gentlemen and intellectuals who brought with them a taste for philosophy and esoteric knowledge. Why would a group of manual laborers invite outsiders into their midst? Some say it was to preserve their traditions as the demand for stonework dwindled. Others whisper that these newcomers had something the Masons needed: money, power, and influence. Whatever the reason, this shift transformed the guild from a practical association of builders into a secret society obsessed with hidden truths and metaphysical wisdom. Now, rituals weren't just about becoming a better craftsman. They were about becoming something more, someone enlightened, someone who understood the mysteries of the universe itself. The Masons began to develop their own mythology, claiming ties to ancient Egypt, the Temple of Solomon, and even the Knights Templar. This was the age of alchemy and the occult, and the Freemasons, with their secret handshakes and coded language, fit right in. But secrecy breeds suspicion. And while the Freemasons insisted their ceremonies were innocent, merely symbolic representations of moral and ethical lessons, others weren't so sure. Whispers of dark rites and sinister schemes circulated in hushed tones. Some claimed that these so-called gentlemen met at night to conduct strange rituals, sacrificing animals, or worse, to unholy powers. These early rumors, while likely unfounded, sparked a fear that would only grow as the Freemasons became more powerful. For centuries, this fear has persisted. The early days of Freemasonry saw its members accused of devil worship, conspiracies to overthrow governments, and even sorcery. One particular tale that haunted the minds of those outside the Brotherhood was the idea that Masons could summon spirits and manipulate forces beyond human comprehension. The symbols they used in their architecture and rituals were said to be keys to unlocking dark, otherworldly power. It didn't help that many of these symbols, like the all-seeing eye and the compass and square, seemed to hint at a knowledge forbidden to mere mortals. By the 18th century, Freemasonry had spread across Europe and into the New World, and with its expansion came a surge of paranoia and fear. People began to see the Masons' influence everywhere, in politics, in religion, in the very fabric of society. It seemed as though every significant event, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, was touched by the unseen hand of the Freemasons. And this is where the fear truly took root. Because if the Freemasons had the power to shape nations, what else could they do? What other machinations were they setting in motion behind closed doors, while the rest of the world remained blissfully ignorant? It was as if they were a hidden hand, pulling the strings of history itself. And if you weren't careful, if you asked the wrong questions or stumbled too close to the truth, you might just disappear, just like William Morgan, the man who vanished after threatening to reveal Masonic secrets in 1826. Even today, the true extent of Masonic influence remains shrouded in mystery. Members insist that their rituals are benign, focused on self-improvement and brotherhood. Yet, there are dark stories that refuse to die. Tales of Masonic lodges acting as fronts for powerful elites, secret societies within secret societies where the stakes are life and death, and shadowy figures who appear and disappear as if by magic. And what of those who try to expose these secrets? They often meet tragic, untimely ends, leaving behind more questions than answers. The allure of Freemasonry's veiled beginnings lies in the fact that we may never know the whole truth. What we do know, though, is that the fear of the unknown can be just as powerful, just as terrifying as any dark ritual. Whether it's rooted in reality or mere superstition, the idea that a group of men could possess such knowledge, such influence, and guard it with such ruthless dedication is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. So, as we delve deeper into the shadows of Freemasonry, keep one thing in mind. These aren't just stories. They're histories, histories born from stone, shrouded in smoke, and sealed in blood. Chapter 2. The Hidden Hand in Revolutions. They were just a group of enlightened men with lofty ideals, or so they claimed. But what if these Freemasons were something more sinister, something far more dangerous? What if they were the masterminds behind some of the bloodiest revolutions in human history, lurking in the shadows, orchestrating events that would reshape the world forever? Let's take a step back and look at one of the most influential periods of change, the late 18th century, a time of monumental upheaval. It's as if an invisible hand reached out and pushed entire nations into chaos and rebellion. The American and French revolutions turned society on its head, leaving monarchies decapitated and new republics rising from the ashes. To some, these revolutions represented the natural evolution of human rights and liberty. To others, they were the culmination of a secret plan, a Masonic agenda to dismantle old regimes and erect new ones under their control. It's no secret that many of the key figures in these revolutions were Freemasons. They openly wore their symbols, spoke in riddles that echoed Masonic principles, and attended meetings held behind closed doors. But did they use their influence to guide the revolutions, or were they just along for the ride? The American Revolution is a perfect place to start. Look closely, and you'll see that several founding fathers, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and John Hancock, were prominent Freemasons. This wasn't some hidden detail. It was something they embraced openly. But being members of the Brotherhood wasn't merely a social club for these men. The ideals espoused by the Freemasons, equality, fraternity, and liberty, conveniently aligned with a burgeoning desire for independence from British rule. Some believe that the Masons' influence went much deeper than shared values. Take Benjamin Franklin, for instance. He was more than just a statesman and a Freemason. He was also a Grand Master in the organization, with connections to lodges all over Europe. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, Franklin spent time in France, meeting with other Masons, building alliances, and possibly planning for the day the colonies would break away from Britain. As for George Washington, the image of him wearing his Masonic regalia is one of the most iconic depictions of a Freemason in power. Throughout the Revolutionary War, Masonic lodges served as places of refuge and strategy for American officers. Some say that vital war plans were drawn up in lodge meetings, and critical decisions were influenced by the shared bond of Freemasonry. Was it loyalty to their country that drove these men, or loyalty to their brothers? Historians argue that while Freemasons played pivotal roles in the American Revolution, there's no concrete evidence to suggest they orchestrated it as a grand Masonic scheme. But the same can't be said for the French Revolution. If there's a case for the Masonic hand guiding the world, it's right there in the blood-soaked streets of Paris during the late 1700s. The French Revolution was more chaotic and far more violent than its American counterpart. It wasn't just a struggle for independence. It was a brutal dismantling of an entire societal structure, complete with public executions and mass hysteria. Some believe this level of chaos was deliberate, stirred up by forces that sought to destroy the old order and usher in something new, something entirely within their control. Enter the Grand Orient de France, one of the most prominent Masonic lodges of the time. Many of the Revolution's key architects, including Maximilien Robespierre, the man synonymous with the Reign of Terror, were affiliated with this lodge. Masonic ideals of liberty and equality bled into the Revolution's rhetoric. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The triangles, the levels, the eyes, all of it speaking to a hidden order pulling the strings behind the scenes. But if the Masons were behind the revolution, they were anything but merciful. Robespierre himself fell victim to the same guillotine he had fed for so long. The revolution spiraled out of control, and whether it was planned or not, the Masons, like many others, were swept up in the tide of violence and bloodshed. Was this what they had intended? Or had the monster they helped create turned against them? As with any secret society, separating fact from fiction is no easy task. Some historians argue that the Masons merely found themselves at the center of these revolutions by chance. After all, they were men of influence, and revolutions attract influential people. But others point to the overwhelming number of Masons involved in both revolutions, suggesting that the Brotherhood's role was far from accidental. The symbols that cropped up during these revolutions are another clue that keeps conspiracy theorists up at night. The eye in the triangle, often called the Eye of Providence, appeared not just in Masonic lodges, but also in revolutionary documents and iconography. The very layout of Washington, D.C. is said to be rife with Masonic symbolism. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's a sign of a greater plan, hidden in plain sight. Debates continue to rage among scholars and historians. The Masons, they argue, are a convenient scapegoat for people looking to make sense of complex historical events. Yes, the Masons were involved, but were they really pulling the strings? Or were they just one more faction in a sea of competing interests? And yet, the fear remains. Fear that the revolutions that shaped our world were the result of careful orchestration by a secret society with its own agenda. Fear that everything we know about freedom and democracy is a lie spun by men cloaked in darkness. Fear that they're still out there, manipulating events from behind the scenes. Because the truth is, we'll never know for sure. That's the problem with secrecy. It leaves room for doubt and suspicion to fester. Maybe the Freemasons were just enlightened men with a taste for esoteric rituals. Or maybe, just maybe, they were the hidden hand, pushing nations into the abyss of revolution and chaos, all to remake the world in their own image. Either way, the symbols of Freemasonry still watch us, etched into buildings, on our currency, even in the very foundations of our cities. The hand that shaped revolutions might be invisible, but its fingerprints are everywhere. Chapter 3. The mysterious case of William Morgan. The small town of Batavia, New York, might seem like an unlikely place for a story that would shake the very foundations of American society, but that's exactly where it happened. It was the year 1826 when William Morgan, a man with little power or influence, took on one of the most secretive organizations in the world, the Freemasons. And he paid the ultimate price for it. William Morgan was a man with a reputation, though not necessarily a good one. He was a drifter of sorts, a man who'd moved around from one town to another, taking up various trades and jobs. His brushes with the law were numerous, including debts he never seemed able to repay and time spent in debtor's prison. But it was his association with the Freemasons that would seal his fate and write his name in history as the man who vanished into thin air. Morgan was never more than a low-ranking member in the local Masonic lodge. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't powerful, but he was clever. And in the early 1820s, he started making noise about exposing the true secrets of the Freemasons. That's right. This relatively unknown man claimed he was going to lift the veil and reveal the hidden rituals and ceremonies of the Masonic order to the world. Whether it was out of a genuine desire to expose what he saw as corruption or simply a way to make some money by selling his story, nobody knows for sure. But what is certain is that the Masons weren't happy about it. The whispers began almost as soon as Morgan's plans were made public. He'd signed a contract with a local printer, David C. Miller, to publish a book that promised to lay bare the Masons' deepest secrets. This book, titled Illustrations of Masonry, would go on to become infamous, not because of its content, but because of what happened to its author. Morgan and Miller started working on the book in secret, but in a small town like Batavia, secrets don't stay hidden for long. The local Masonic lodge caught wind of Morgan's intentions, and that's when things took a dark turn. Morgan began to receive threats. Men would show up at his door late at night, warning him to abandon the project. His friends noticed strange men following him around town, lurking in the shadows, watching his every move. But Morgan, whether out of stubbornness or a false sense of security, refused to back down. And then, on a warm September evening in 1826, he disappeared. The official story is that Morgan was arrested on charges of failing to repay a debt, an all-too-common occurrence in his life. But this time, things were different. He was taken to the local jail, but he didn't stay there for long. That night, a group of men arrived, claiming to be friends of Morgan's who were willing to pay off his debt and secure his release. The jailer, not suspecting anything, let Morgan go, but he never made it home. Morgan was bundled into a waiting carriage, which sped off into the darkness. It was the last time anyone would see him alive. Over the next few days, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he'd been dragged off to Canada. Others whispered he'd been murdered and thrown into the murky waters of the Niagara River. But the one thing everyone agreed on was this: the Freemasons were behind it. What happened next is what makes the story of William Morgan so chilling. His disappearance didn't go unnoticed. People were outraged. How could a man simply vanish like that? And why was nobody being held accountable? Fingers pointed directly at the Freemasons, accusing them of kidnapping, if not outright killing, Morgan to silence him. The Masons, of course, denied everything. They claimed no knowledge of Morgan's whereabouts and insisted that he'd probably just run off to avoid his debts. But few believed them. The scandal blew up into a national crisis. In the weeks and months that followed Morgan's disappearance, the outcry against the Freemasons grew louder. Newspapers across the country published stories accusing the Masons of being a corrupt and dangerous organization, a shadowy cabal willing to do anything to protect their secrets, even murder. This public outrage gave birth to something unexpected: the Anti-Masonic Party, America's first third political party. The Anti-Masonic Party used the mysterious disappearance of William Morgan as its rallying cry. They claimed that the Freemasons held too much power and influence over American society, that their secrecy was a threat to democracy itself. Their message resonated with the public, who were already uneasy about secret societies operating behind closed doors. The party gained traction, winning seats in local and state governments, and even running a candidate in the presidential election of 1832. But what about William Morgan? What really happened to him? Despite numerous investigations, no one was ever convicted of his kidnapping or murder. A few low-level Masons were tried and given light sentences for conspiracy to kidnap, but it did little to quell the rumors. The truth was buried as deeply as Morgan himself, whose body was never found. Some say the Masons took him to Fort Niagara, where he was tied up, gagged, and thrown into the river. Others claim he escaped his captors and lived out his days quietly in another country. To this day, the story of William Morgan remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. It's a tale that speaks to the terrifying power of secrecy, how a group of men, united by oaths and rituals, can close ranks and protect one of their own, no matter the cost. It's a story that has fueled generations of conspiracy theories about Freemasonry, casting a long, dark shadow over their legacy. Whether the Masons were truly responsible for Morgan's disappearance or not, one thing is clear. His vanishing act shook the Freemasons to their core. Membership numbers dwindled, lodges closed, and for a time, the once mighty order seemed to be crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. But the Masons survived, as they always do, adapting to the new reality and eventually regaining much of their former prestige and influence. Yet, the name William Morgan is still whispered in dark corners and hushed tones. His story serves as a reminder of what can happen when you dare to defy a secretive and powerful organization. Whether he was a hero or just a man who made a dangerous gamble, his fate sends chills down the spine of anyone who's ever wondered what secrets the Masons might be hiding, and what they're willing to do to keep those secrets buried. Chapter 4. Dark Rituals and Alleged Occultism. It's almost midnight. A grand old building stands silently on a deserted street corner. Its windows dimly lit, there's a faint hum of voices from within, a low, rhythmic chanting that grows stronger as the seconds tick by. What are they saying? What are they doing? You dare not get any closer, because the rumors you've heard about the men in there, the Freemasons, are enough to send shivers down your spine. People say they dabble in dark rituals. They whisper that these men aren't just some fraternity of businessmen and lawyers. They're occultists, conjurers of unspeakable forces. Some say they worship the devil himself. But is any of it true? Accusations of occultism have followed Freemasonry like a dark shadow since its inception. From the moment people learned that these men met behind closed doors, performed strange ceremonies, and used cryptic symbols, suspicions began to brew. What were they hiding? Why such secrecy? And most importantly, what was the true nature of their rituals? Let's start with the basics. Freemasonry, by its own admission, deals in symbolism and esoteric knowledge. Members are introduced to the society through a series of stages or degrees, each with its own set of ceremonies. The rituals vary from lodge to lodge, but certain elements remain the same. Initiates are blindfolded, asked to take oaths of loyalty, and made to perform specific actions, like walking in circles or making peculiar gestures. To an outsider, these might seem like harmless traditions, but in the hands of the paranoid or the fearful, these acts take on a more sinister light. One of the most controversial aspects of Freemasonry is its use of symbols. The compass and square, the all-seeing eye, and the number 33, these are all staples of Masonic imagery. But it's not just their ubiquity that sets people on edge. It's what these symbols allegedly represent. Take the all-seeing eye, for example. To the Masons, it's a symbol of God's omnipresence, a reminder that a higher power is always watching. But to conspiracy theorists, the eye is a sinister mark, a sign of the Illuminati and their supposed quest for world domination. The symbols are like puzzle pieces that, when assembled in just the right way, paint a terrifying picture of dark powers and hidden knowledge. And then there's the matter of their rituals, so mysterious and shrouded in secrecy that only a select few truly know what happens behind those locked doors. Critics have long claimed that the Masons' rituals are steeped in occultism, borrowing heavily from ancient mysticism, Egyptian rites, and even practices linked to the Kabbalah. Some accounts even go as far as suggesting that the higher degrees of Freemasonry are initiated into black magic and the worship of demonic entities. One of the most enduring tales of Masonic occultism is that of the infamous Baphomet. The name itself conjures images of a terrifying, horned figure, a goat-headed demon with a human body and dark wings. In the 19th century, a French writer named Leo Taxil published a series of works claiming that the Freemasons worshipped Baphomet, performing grotesque rites in his honor. Taxil's writings caused a sensation, and suddenly, the Freemasons weren't just seen as a secretive society, they were branded as Satanists. Taxil's hoax was eventually exposed, but the damage had already been done. The image of the Freemasons as devil-worshipping occultists had taken root in the public imagination, and it was there to stay. But even without Taxil's lurid tales, there have been real incidents that tied Freemasonry to the occult in unsettling ways. Consider the case of Aleister Crowley, a name synonymous with darkness and occultism. Crowley, who called himself the Great Beast and was labeled as the wickedest man in the world, was indeed a Freemason, albeit a controversial one. He founded his own esoteric order, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which borrowed heavily from Masonic rituals. Crowley's involvement in Freemasonry, however tangential, served to reinforce the idea that there was something deeply sinister about the organization. But perhaps the most unnerving Masonic connection to the occult occurred in Italy during the 1980s with the Propaganda Do, or P2 Lodge scandal. This Masonic lodge was no ordinary chapter. It was a secretive group that engaged in political corruption, money laundering, and allegedly occult practices. Documents discovered after the death of its leader, Licio Gelli, hinted at a clandestine network that manipulated Italian politics, business, and even the Vatican. But what do the Freemasons have to say about all this? Well, the official stance of Freemasonry has always been that their rituals and symbols are purely symbolic and meant to convey moral lessons. They claim to be a society dedicated to self-improvement, charity, and the betterment of mankind. They deny any involvement in the occult or any practices that could be considered sinister. Members often point out that much of what is known about Freemasonry's rituals has been misinterpreted or exaggerated by outsiders who don't understand the context. For instance, the ritual of blindfolding an initiate isn't meant to signify any occult initiation. It's a symbol of entering a new state of awareness, a metaphor for being blind to the world's true nature before being enlightened by Masonic teachings. But the secrecy itself, the secrecy is what keeps people wondering, imagining, and fearing. There's something about locked doors and half-whispered oaths that make even the most benign act feel malevolent. It's human nature to fear what we don't understand. And when an organization like the Freemasons keeps its traditions hidden, it's easy to see why people jump to conclusions. The truth is, we may never know the full story. The accusations of occultism might be nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations and a desire to paint the unknown as terrifying. Or perhaps they're a glimpse of something real, something dark that lurks just beneath the surface of those well-dressed men with their rings and regalia. Chapter 5. Scandals and Secrets Unveiled. You'd think that a group like the Freemasons, one that prides itself on brotherhood, morality, and ethical conduct, wouldn't get tangled up in criminal activities or scandals. But history tells a different story. Beneath the polished veneer of charity work and lofty ideals, there's a darker side. A side that has led to shocking scandals and criminal acts that have only fueled fears about what really goes on behind those closed doors. If the Freemasons have nothing to hide, then how do we explain the scandals that have rocked their organization time and time again? One of the most chilling tales of corruption, secrecy, and betrayal centers around the Propaganda Do Lodge in Italy during the 1980s, a scandal so explosive it almost brought down the Italian government. But before we get into the grisly details, let's set the stage. The P2 Lodge was supposed to be a regular Masonic lodge, albeit a bit more exclusive than the average chapter. It was led by a man named Licio Gelli, a shadowy figure who became known as the Puppet Master. He was a smooth-talking businessman with powerful connections in politics, finance, and the intelligence community. Gelli transformed the P2 Lodge into a web of deceit and corruption, creating what many would come to see as a state within a state. It all started when a series of documents were discovered, listing hundreds of members of the P2 Lodge. The names on the list were jaw-dropping: politicians, high-ranking military officials, judges, journalists, and even clergy. These weren't just ordinary citizens. They were the elite, the people who ran Italy, or at least that's what they wanted everyone to think. The revelations were like a bomb going off in Italian society. The list showed that Gelli's lodge wasn't just meeting to discuss philosophy or the merits of brotherly love. They were planning, plotting, even on how to take control of Italy's institutions, infiltrate the government, and wield power from the shadows. And that was just the beginning. Soon, more sinister allegations came to light. Jelly and his cronies were accused of money laundering, arms trafficking, and even orchestrating acts of terrorism. One of the most shocking incidents linked to the P2 Lodge was the mysterious death of Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker due to his close ties to the Vatican. Calvi was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1982, pockets stuffed with bricks and cash. It looked like a gruesome message, one that warned others to keep their mouths shut. Many believe the P2 Lodge, with its tentacles reaching deep into Italy's political and financial institutions, was behind Calvi's death. The scandal was so huge that it led to the public exposure and dissolution of the P2 Lodge. But the damage was done. Italy's faith in Freemasonry and in its government was shattered. To this day, the P2 Lodge remains a chilling example of how Masonic lodges can be twisted into tools of power and corruption, where the ideals of brotherhood and morality become warped into a nightmarish conspiracy of silence and control. But the P2 Lodge wasn't the only scandal to stain the Freemasons' reputation. Take, for instance, the case of the Square Mile Gang in London during the 1970s. This group of Freemasons, comprised of prominent businessmen and local officials, was involved in a series of shady dealings, including insider trading, bribery, and backroom agreements that swindled the city out of millions. The gang's influence was so pervasive that some said they were untouchable. After all, when the people who are supposed to be investigating corruption are members of the same brotherhood as the criminals, who can you trust? The case finally came to light after a whistleblower, himself a Mason, went public with evidence of the gang's wrongdoings. The ensuing investigation revealed a tangled web of connections, secret meetings, and coded language that made it nearly impossible for outsiders to understand what was really going on. Several members were eventually prosecuted, but many more escaped justice. The scandal left a deep scar on London's Masonic community, as it exposed just how easily the bonds of brotherhood could be manipulated for personal gain. And it's not just Europe where Freemasonry has come under fire. Across the Atlantic in the United States, a particularly disturbing case emerged in the 1920s. The Ku Klux Klan, an organization already steeped in hatred and violence, found sympathetic allies within some Masonic lodges in the South. This wasn't official Freemasonry policy, far from it, but the fact that local lodges allowed Klan members to operate freely within their ranks painted a dark picture of complicity. Masonic temples were used as meeting places for Klan rallies, and Masonic symbols were seen on some Klan members' robes, sparking outrage and disgust. To their credit, many Grand Lodges in the U.S. took strong stances against this alliance, expelling members who were found to be in the Klan and denouncing any such affiliations. But the damage was done. The association of Freemasonry with such a vile organization cast a long shadow over the Brotherhood's reputation, a shadow that took decades to dispel. The problem with Freemasonry structure is that each lodge is semi-autonomous, meaning it's easy for a few bad apples to spoil the whole bunch. When scandals emerge, the Grand Lodge, the governing body of Freemasonry, often claims ignorance, insisting that the actions of individual lodges or members don't reflect the organization as a whole. It's a convenient defense, but it doesn't do much to allay public fears. After all, how can an organization that prides itself on unity and brotherhood wash its hands of responsibility so easily? So, what does Freemasonry do when its name is dragged through the mud? They often circle the wagons, expelling members involved in scandals, issuing statements of condemnation, and emphasizing their commitment to ethical behavior. But the secrecy of the organization means that these responses are rarely seen by the public. When Masonic lodges are raided and documents are seized, like in the P2 case, the damage control happens quietly, behind closed doors. The problem is, every scandal that breaks confirms people's worst fears. That Freemasonry, for all its talk of charity and morality, is hiding something dark, something malevolent, something that, when uncovered, is enough to make anyone think twice about the men meeting in that old building down the street. These cases are just the tip of the iceberg. The truth is, whenever power and secrecy mix, corruption is never far behind. Whether it's a lone rogue lodge or a widespread network, the dark side of Freemasonry is real, and it's left a trail of scandals and shattered lives in its wake. For every story that makes it to the light of day, there are a dozen more that remain hidden, buried deep within the organization's tightly bound secrets. Chapter 6: Modern-Day Conspiracy Theories. Unraveling the web of secrets. Freemasonry has been a magnet for conspiracy theories for as long as it has existed. The allure of a powerful, secretive group pulling strings behind the scenes is irresistible to some, and the Freemasons fit the bill perfectly. But in the 21st century, thanks to the internet's reach and social media's wildfire spread of information, Masonic conspiracies have exploded. From controlling governments to orchestrating world events, the Freemasons have been accused of it all. So, let's dive into the most popular modern conspiracy theories about the Masons and see if there's any grain of truth beneath all the paranoia and fear. 1. Freemasons and the New World Order. The ultimate global puppet masters? When people talk about the New World Order, the Freemasons' name is never far behind. The theory goes like this. The Freemasons, along with other shadowy groups like the Illuminati, are part of a centuries-old plan to create a single, global government that will control every aspect of human life. The endgame? A society where a few elite members dictate the fate of billions. Proponents of this theory point to Masonic symbols that appear on everyday items, like the pyramid and eye on the back of the US dollar bill, and claim that they're proof of the Masons' influence. They argue that these symbols are part of a hidden language that marks their control over the world's economic and political systems. In fact, some go as far as to say that every major war, financial crisis, and political upheaval is orchestrated by the Masons to further their agenda. The truth behind the theory: it's easy to see how these ideas gain traction. Many early American leaders, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, were Masons, and the influence of the Brotherhood on American culture and symbolism is undeniable. However, most historians and scholars dismiss the idea of a unified, centuries-old conspiracy as implausible. The symbols that conspiracy theorists latch onto, like the all-seeing eye, weren't even originally Masonic. They were co-opted over time. But could there be some truth to the theory? Well, Freemasons have always been influential in society, but there's no hard evidence that they are currently steering the world toward a totalitarian future. That said, the fear of elites manipulating global events is understandable and continues to drive belief in this theory. 2. Masons and Satanism. Worshipping the devil in disguise? It's a chilling thought. Powerful men in black robes gathering in the dead of night to worship Satan and engage in dark, occult rituals. This theory holds that Freemasons, especially those in the highest ranks, are actually Satanists. It's believed that the rituals Masons conduct are not just symbolic, but are actually meant to summon demonic forces and offer allegiance to Lucifer. One of the most persistent pieces of evidence for this theory is the Masonic association with the figure of Baphomet, a goat-headed deity that's become synonymous with Satanism. The image of Baphomet was popularized in the 19th century and has since been used in countless conspiracy theories to suggest that Masons have a secret, evil agenda. The truth behind the theory: the association with Satanism is largely a product of misunderstanding and fear. Freemasonry is not a religion, and its teachings don't align with any particular faith. While it does incorporate some esoteric and mystical elements, such as references to the Kabbalah and other ancient texts, this isn't proof of devil worship. The Baphomet figure, often cited by critics, has no actual connection to Freemasonry and was introduced by a French satirist, Leo Taxil, who later admitted to fabricating the story as a hoax. While some individuals who were Masons like Aleister Crowley dabbled in the occult, their actions don't represent the organization as a whole. The claim that the Masons worship the devil remains just that, a claim with no credible evidence to back it up. 3. Controlling governments and elections. Are the Masons rigging democracy? It's no secret that Freemasons have historically had ties to political figures. In fact, in some countries, membership in the Masonic order was practically a prerequisite for holding office. But modern conspiracy theories take this historical influence a step further, suggesting that Masons actively control governments and rig elections to place their own members, or at least those sympathetic to their goals, into power. The theory extends beyond influencing elections to include secretly deciding policies and orchestrating major international events. The idea is that Masons meet in secret to decide the fate of nations, using their network to push forward an agenda that benefits the few at the expense of the many. The truth behind the theory: Freemasonry certainly has a history of political involvement. Many Masons have held significant positions in government, particularly in the United States and Europe. But is there a coordinated effort to manipulate democracy? Highly unlikely. The structure of Freemasonry is too decentralized to support such a coordinated global conspiracy. However, the fact that Masons exist in positions of power and that their meetings and affiliations are kept private makes it easy for people to jump to conclusions. When combined with the historic secrecy of the organization, it's not hard to see why this theory persists. 4. The Masons and secret science. Hoarding knowledge to control humanity? Another modern theory suggests that Freemasons have access to secret scientific knowledge and technology that they use to maintain control over society. Some believe that the Masons know the true nature of human history, have contact with extraterrestrial beings, or possess technology far beyond what the public is aware of. According to this theory, Freemasons are hiding these advancements, releasing them only when it suits their purposes. Some proponents even argue that the Masons have a hidden hand in scientific institutions and use their influence to suppress discoveries that could benefit humanity if they were widely known. The truth behind the theory. This theory plays on the fascination with secret knowledge and the fear of being left in the dark. Freemasonry does have a long history of valuing education, science, and enlightenment principles. But the leap from valuing knowledge to hoarding alien technology and rewriting history is a stretch. There's no concrete evidence that Freemasons are controlling scientific research or hiding groundbreaking technology. Most members are ordinary people, and the lodges aren't exactly outfitted with high-tech labs or alien artifacts. The bottom line: while these theories are fascinating and make for great stories, there's little to support the idea that Freemasonry is at the heart of a global conspiracy. Sure, some Masons are influential and powerful, but that doesn't mean they're manipulating world events or worshiping the devil. In the end, most of these theories are built on a foundation of fear, ignorance, and a desire to find simple explanations for complex realities. Could there be some truth in them? It's possible. After all, where there's smoke, there's often fire. But more often than not, what we see in these theories is the smoke of paranoia, billowing out from the darkness of the unknown. Chapter 7. Separating Myth from Reality. Freemasonry has always been cloaked in a fog of fear and speculation. From whispered secrets of dark rituals and demonic worship to tales of world domination and control over governments, the rumors are endless and, quite frankly, chilling. But now that we've journeyed through the dark labyrinth of Masonic conspiracies and scandals, it's time to shed some light on the truth, if we can find it. Because separating myth from reality in the shadowy world of the Freemasons isn't just about looking at facts. It's about understanding why these myths persist in the first place. Why do people fear the Masons? And what's the real story behind all those ominous symbols and secretive rituals? Let's start by taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. From their beginnings as medieval stonemason guilds, the Freemasons have been rooted in mystery. Their symbols, the compass and square, the all-seeing eye, the checkered floor, were designed to teach lessons of morality and self-improvement to their members. But over time, these symbols took on a life of their own. To those outside the fraternity, they appeared strange, unfamiliar, and even sinister. And that's where the trouble begins. Because when people don't understand something, they tend to fill in the blanks with their own ideas, and those ideas often turn dark. It's human nature. We fear what we don't know. And the Freemasons, with their closed-door meetings, strange symbols, and rituals that remain largely hidden, have been the perfect canvas for people to project their darkest fears onto. Consider the popular belief that the Freemasons are secretly running the world, pulling the strings behind major global events. We saw it in the theories about the New World Order, the accusations of Masonic influence in government and business, and even the whispers of their ties to other secret societies like the Illuminati. It's a thrilling story, right? But let's face it, it's a story that doesn't hold up to much scrutiny. Historians and scholars who have studied Freemasonry extensively argue that while Masons have always valued their privacy, there's no concrete evidence to suggest they're involved in some grand conspiracy to dominate the world. Yes, Masons have been influential. Many of America's founding fathers were members, but so were countless other groups. The reality is that Freemasonry's influence tends to be more local than global. Lodges focus on charity work, community service, and personal development, not world domination. So where do these conspiracy theories come from? Part of it has to do with the structure of Freemasonry itself. Each lodge operates independently, and while there are overarching principles and rituals, there's no single authority that dictates what all Masons should do. This decentralized structure creates the impression of a shadowy network, an interconnected web of lodges that seem both connected and disconnected at the same time. To an outsider, this looks like the perfect setup for a secret society capable of hiding its true agenda. But there's another reason why people fear the Masons, and it's much deeper than just their secrecy. It's psychological. For centuries, secret societies have represented the ultimate unknown. They symbolize exclusion and elitism in a group that you're not a part of. In times of social or political turmoil, people look for someone to blame, and secret societies are an easy target. After all, if you can't see what they're doing, who's to say they aren't doing something terrible? Let's not forget the internet's role in perpetuating these myths. Social media, blogs, and forums allow anyone to post their theories, no matter how wild or unfounded. Someone spots a Masonic symbol on a building, takes a photo, and posts it with a caption like, "Look what they don't want you to see." Before you know it, the image has been shared thousands of times, and now people are talking about how the Freemasons are planning to take over the world through architectural symbolism. It's absurd, but the reach and speed of the internet make it difficult to combat. But not every Masonic scandal is a myth, is it? We can't ignore cases like the P2 Lodge in Italy during the 1980s or the influence of Masonic lodges in early American politics. These events did happen, and they provide just enough fuel to keep the fire of conspiracy theories burning. When you have real instances of corruption and wrongdoing within Masonic lodges, it makes the rest of the myths seem a little more plausible. If some Masons are corrupt, why not all of them? And if some Masonic lodges have hidden agendas, what's stopping the rest? Freemasons themselves have tried to address these misconceptions. They've opened their doors to the public, held informational sessions, and even run social media campaigns to demystify their practices. They emphasize their commitment to charity, self-improvement, and community service. But their efforts often fall flat. The myth is just too powerful, too deeply ingrained in the public's imagination. So, what's the truth? The truth is that Freemasonry is complex. It's a society that values tradition and symbolism, and yes, secrecy. But the secrecy isn't about hiding world-changing conspiracies. It's about preserving the experience of initiation, the rituals that Masons believe help guide their members toward becoming better men. It's not about keeping the public out, but about creating a space where members can engage in introspection and self-improvement. The true legacy of Freemasonry lies not in conspiracy or scandal, but in its historical role as a force for social change and enlightenment. During the Enlightenment period, Masonic lodges were places where men of different social classes and beliefs could meet as equals, a radical idea at the time. They supported education, scientific inquiry, and democratic principles. And yet, the Masons' very success in shaping society has also made them a target. Because with influence comes suspicion, and with suspicion, fear. In the end, Freemasonry's legacy is dual-edged. One side gleams with the light of progress and charity, while the other is shrouded in darkness and fear. And maybe that's the way it will always be. After all, a group with secrets will always be viewed with suspicion. The line between myth and reality will continue to blur, and people will continue to wonder, what are the Freemasons really hiding? Maybe the answer is simple. Maybe it's nothing at all. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something we're not ready to know. Because sometimes, the scariest secrets aren't the ones that are whispered behind closed doors, but the ones that exist in our own minds, feeding on our fear of the unknown.